Hello again and welcome back to Journey of Self-Awareness, your YouTube channel for personal growth and self-exploration. I'm your host, Tado-san Harmon, and we've been having a series of videos about offerings to the divine as part of a daily spiritual practice, and I wanted to continue that discussion today by discussing Tibetan water bowl offerings, which are an immensely powerful and incredibly significant and very effective form of offering practice that is practiced widely by Tibetans from all schools of Tibetan Buddhism. And today I want to give you kind of an overview, at least give you a sense of the importance and the significance of water bowl offerings. This is a beautiful practice that anyone can do. It's a simple practice, yet it's very effective and quite powerful. And so I should say I've been discussing these practices in more or less general terms, and I'll continue that today, but I also want to provide you with enough detail so that you have a better understanding of how important these practices are and how meaningful they can be, and what a wonderful addition to a daily practice. They really are quite profound, as you'll see, and I hope to convey that in this video. Water bowl offerings are one of the simplest and yet most profound offering practices in Tibetan Buddhism. Of course, as I mentioned once before, there are very, very many offering practices in Tibetan Buddhism, like a vast array of offering practices, but this is one of the most common. And water bowl offerings have a great deal of symbolic significance. They can symbolize generosity, purity, cultivation of positive intentions, and of course these kinds of intentions and virtues resonate widely across the schools of tradition Buddhism and the various traditions in Tibetan Buddhism. So water bowl offerings are valued and practiced by all Tibetans, not just Nyingma or Gelugpa or Sakyapa Tibetans. And I also should say that water bowl offerings are readily accessible to most people. It's a simple practice. It's available to everyone. And so practitioners of all backgrounds regularly make water bowl offerings a part of their daily practice, and they'll incorporate it into their daily spiritual practice and meditations that they'll perform at a home altar or shrine, for example, some of which can be quite simple. I don't know if you've had the pleasure of traveling throughout Southeast Asia, but in many, particularly Chinese cultures, you'll see just small shelves up on the wall with a deity figure and offerings placed on it every day. And they grace so many, like small shops and stores. For example, if you go to any of the Chinatowns in North America, you'll often see these, and places where Taoism and Confucianism are practiced and so on. Water bowl offerings are part of a daily ritual, and they're common in the ceremonies that you'll see performed in many Tibetan monasteries and temples. They're also made during important religious festivals and gatherings, and not only as a spiritual practice, but also as it's a form of communal devotion, I guess you could say. Water bowl offerings show an individual's respect for the Buddha, the Dharma, which are the sacred teachings, the Buddhist teachings, And the Noble Sangha, which I mentioned before, is the community of Buddhist believers and practitioners. And it also is a way to show respect to one's own root guru, if you have one, and the lineage of gurus that that you may be a part of now. Of course, as I said once before, it's important to have a lama which will connect you to a lineage. The act of performing water offerings then connects a person to a lineage, but also with the deities and the sacred objects placed on one's altar, for example. It strengthens one's sense of reverence and respect and awe for the divine, and it inspires the mind then to cultivate the holy virtues and spiritual qualities that are necessary on a path. Now, the water bowls themselves are small bowls. I'll tell you more about them in a moment. They're usually placed on an altar or a home shrine, and they're offered to the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and the field of merit, which I talked about in the last video. The field of merit is a visual representation of all of the Buddhas and deities and the heavenly beings and other sacred beings, and for example the bodhisattvas and the arahats and the dakas and the dakinis, who we might think of as like angels, the dharma protectors. But of course the field of merit, which has a central figure, usually Padmasambhava in the Nyingma tradition, or maybe Tsongkhapa, or the Sakyamuni Buddha, or other central figures which represent the epitome of Buddhahood, and all the Buddha deities represent the highest of the high. They all represent the same enlightened qualities. So in an important sense, they're all equals. And of course, this field of merit, which is also called the field of potential, usually we also include all sentient beings and envision them also as being a part of the field of merit, and we want to include them in our offerings and seek blessings for them also. Now, while water may seem like a modest offering, it holds tremendous significance, symbolic significance, as we'll see more in a minute. It represents various virtues such as purity and generosity and devotion. So the practice of offering water then it's also a gesture of respect, of devotion, of purification, as I mentioned, and because it doesn't require expensive materials, it just needs a set of clean bowls and clean water, then this practice is widely available to anyone. And just like other offering practices I've talked about in recent videos, freely offering water without attachment or clinging, it helps purify our minds of greed, of our clinging to material possessions, and it simultaneously cultivates a mind of generosity and charity and goodwill and offering. Now, as I mentioned, water offerings hold deep symbolic significance in Tibetan Buddhism. Water is considered pure. It's an essential element that represents the clarity and the purity of the enlightened mind. Water is often used as a metaphor for an awakened state of the natural state of a mind that is limpid and translucent and clear and luminous. And so there are many metaphors that associate water with an enlightened mind. Now, so in the water offering, the water must be clean and pure. It symbolizes the purity of our intentions and our aspirations, and the act of making water offerings then symbolizes our aspirations to cleanse our mind stream, for example, of impurities, of negative karma, and to cleanse the obscurations to enlightenment. So water offering practices are a way to pave the way to an awakening, to make the receipt of divine grace more likely in our lives. Now, before making a water offering, practitioners will often recite specific mantras or prayers which invoke the presence and the blessings of all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and the Arhats. This recitation of prayers and mantras then becomes an essential part of the offering ritual. And typically in a spiritual practice session, Tibetans will recall the 4 thoughts that turn the mind, which I talked about in a previous video, I guess about 4 or 5 videos ago. Do you remember what they are? It's the preciousness of this present human life, which makes practice and enlightenment possible, and it's the remembrance that life is purely temporary and impermanent, so that we're reminded that chasing after worldly pursuits is a waste of our time. Finally, we remind ourselves of the law of cause and effect, of karma, and remember that karma is immutable. Our actions are definitely going to have consequences, and so we have to do what's necessary to achieve our own liberation, and we have to dedicate ourselves to spiritual practice. These are the 4 thoughts that turn the mind, also known as the 4 remembrances, and helps us to stay the course. In addition to recalling the 4 remembrances, Tibetans will also take refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Noble Sangha, the 3 jewels. They will also spend time generating what they call bodhicitta, which is the compassionate wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Because by becoming enlightened, that puts us in the best position to be of the maximal or optimal benefit for all other sentient beings. So it's a selfless wish to be a benefit to others. They'll spend time generating these kinds of selfless feelings for others, and this sets their intentions then for the spiritual practice that they're conducting that day, which they do every day. And so when making offerings, we're thinking of all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and heavenly beings and our past and future mentors who we haven't met yet but will likely meet later in future lives perhaps. And we make offerings to this field of merit with heartfelt joy and enthusiasm, and with a sense of generosity and warm-hearted well wishes for all beings. And I should also say that Tibetans don't make small or limited offerings. No. Instead, they imagine that their offerings generate infinite bliss in the holy minds of each member of the field of merit. Or they may think of all their offerings being transformed into great clouds of infinite bliss and emptiness that is joyfully and happily received by all the countless beings and Buddhas, enlightened beings and Buddhas everywhere in the 10 directions, they'll say, which is everywhere without regard to directionality. And they will imagine that their offerings generate infinite joy and infinite happiness in the holy minds of all enlightened beings, and that they're contributing to the enlightenment of all sentient beings who are cycling in samsara, the ordinary beings in samsara. But they'll go even further than that, of course, so that instead of just making offerings to the beings in the field of merit, we're also making offerings to all of our enemies. And we imagine that our offerings are an act of charity. So we're including all sentient beings, including everyone in the hell realms, and people who may be starving to death, and those who are homeless and unable to find a job, and those who are having a very hard time in life. They all receive our offerings, and we pray that they will receive the blessings of the divine also. So this is another reason why we're making these offerings, is to be of benefit to everyone without exception, without any limitations. We want to treat everyone with equanimity. We want to treat everyone equally. So we hold nothing back, and we imagine that our offerings are immense and vast and immensely beneficial. Now, I should also mention that the prayers recited during a water offering can also be quite extensive. For example, in addition to the 3 jewels, practitioners might, as I mentioned, make offerings to every Buddha, Bodhisattva, Arhat, statue, stupa, which is a representation of Buddha mind, all of the holy scriptures, and all of them that have ever existed in time, and all of them that will ever exist in time, in not only the 10 directions within this universe, but also in all of the infinite number of universes that could possibly exist in the multiverse. So this is another example of the expansive nature of our offerings. To give you another example, a practitioner might imagine that their water bowl offerings are a manifestation of their own innate wisdom awareness that creates clouds of offerings as infinite as the sky that benefits all sentient beings everywhere. They may imagine that the positive potential, that is the merit generated by their offerings, completely purifies all sentient beings that have ever lived, purifies their mind streams, purifies their obscurations, purifies them of negative karma and any sense of guilt or shame they might be carrying with them. They may pray that their offerings and pure intentions will empty the hell realms, as I mentioned, and immediately bring an end to all the cycles of suffering in samsara. They may say things like, may all impure minds and their obscurations be purified. This is the kind of prayer you'll hear during a water offering. And they may pray that their offering practice serves as a reminder for them to continue to develop the Buddha's enlightened qualities, so that they can be of the utmost benefit to all sentient beings. They may pray, for example, that they cultivate the qualities of the Buddha's mind, the Buddha's speech, the Buddha's body, and that they will reduce their own negative qualities like attachment and greed and hatred and ignorance, while increasing their positive qualities like faith and devotion and respect and rejoicing, or what they also call enthusiastic joy, enthusiastic discipline. So, for example, they may pray, "The things I humbly offer are vast in number and as extensive as space, and I offer food with the wish that all beings may be relieved of their hunger, and I offer water with the wish that all beings may be relieved of thirst, and may all the enlightened deities and Buddhas accept my offerings, enjoy them, and be pleased with them." They may pray, "Through these offerings may all beings be purified of their negative qualities, and may they realize the ultimate nature of reality. Through these offerings may all sentient beings accumulate merit and develop and increase a mind of generosity and reduce their stinginess and miserliness." They may pray that through their offerings all sentient beings will become naturally and spontaneously generous and compassionate. They may say, "I dedicate the merit of making these offerings to the elimination of suffering and its causes from all sentient beings, and for their achievement of happiness and for world peace," for example. They may say, "I make these offerings in order to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all suffering sentient beings," which of course is the Bodhisattva ideal on the Mahayana path. This is the ideal, to dedicate one's life and to even postpone one's own enlightenment until all other beings have achieved enlightenment, until you've seen to it that all other beings achieve enlightenment. Of course, if you decide to make such offerings a part of your own practice, you're going to want to set up a home shrine or a small altar, or make up some other suitable space. For example, you can use a dedicated shelf, as I mentioned, or you can use a table to make water offerings. It's beneficial to create a permanent space where you can do this every day. This helps create a sacred space and a clean space for conducting your spiritual practices. If you want me to make a separate video on how to make up a home shrine, I can do that. Or there's materials online that will also instruct you on how to do this. Home shrine or a small altar is a very personal thing, and the objects that you want to include in it will be specific to you. You want to choose the objects that have the most meaning and which resonate most strongly with you. Usually there will be a central statue of a deity figure like the Buddha or Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, or some people are practicing Tara practices, and they may have representation of another deity, maybe Vajrasattva, for example. And there's often a Thangka painting on the back wall, or a representation of the field of merit, which I have used in my own practice and found very useful to help visualize this vast field of merit that we're making offerings to. And then the shrine will also usually include a variety of other symbolic objects, maybe a small stupa or other representation of Buddha mind, and many other objects, of course. I included many photos of spiritual masters and leaders who I found personally very inspirational. I almost always include a picture of the Dalai Lama, a picture of Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk and master, and others. So these are the kinds of things you might consider for your own practice space. And then traditionally they use 7 small bowls that are arranged in a straight line, Usually they're either slightly touching or they're equidistant from one another. And those are placed on the altar or shelf or table. And they're usually arranged with considerable care. They're not set up there in a haphazard fashion at all. And usually they're placed directly in front, on the front edge of the shrine or altar, which can be quite narrow actually. I used a bookcase for mine. It was only about maybe 14 inches deep. The use of these 7 bowls then represents traditional offerings, which, depending on the tradition, might include things like devotion, confession, rejoicing, requesting the continued turning of the wheel of the Dharma, the teachings, and so on. In traditional Buddhist rituals, those 7 water bowls often represent things like water for drinking, which signifies welcome and respect. The second bowl might represent water for washing, which can represent purifying the body and the mind. The third bowl might represent flowers, which symbolize beauty and the blossoming of our holy virtues. The fourth bowl might represent incense, which symbolizes moral ethics and the fragrance of virtuous deeds and right action or moral conduct. The fifth bowl might represent light, the light of wisdom, dispelling ignorance and the darkness of this decadent age. And light, of course, is a profound metaphor, and butter lamps, for example, are offered as a representation of enlightenment. The sixth bowl can represent perfume or scented water, which signifies the purity of speech and our harmonious interactions with one another. The seventh bowl might represent food or an abundant harvest, which symbolizes satisfaction and fulfillment. Each bowl then corresponds to a particular symbolic offering, and when you combine them, then that creates a complete and total offering. Very often, practitioners will assign each bowl with a specific prayer or aspiration. And while the aspirations vary, a common set of aspirations might include generosity for the first bowl, for example, and willingness to give oneself to others selflessly. The second bowl can represent ethical conduct or a commitment to right living, including refraining from harmful actions and practicing virtue, for example. So sometimes these can be simple one-line aspirations, as you'll see in a moment. The third bowl might represent aspirations for patience, for forbearance, the ability to endure difficulties without anger or frustration, for example. The fourth bowl can symbolize dedication and diligence and effort in one's spiritual practice. The fifth bowl can represent mindfulness and mindfulness meditation, aspirations for meditation and for inner calm, or what I've called calm abiding. The sixth bowl can represent the cultivation of wisdom and insights into the nature of reality, while the seventh and final bowl then can be used to dedicate the merits of one's practice again for the well-being and the enlightenment of all sentient beings. So let me say a few things now about the details of this practice. Water offerings are often made in small silver bowls, although they can be made of copper or glass or ceramic or even wood. Or these water offerings can be made in very ornate vessels called chang pots, and which again are often made of precious metals like silver or copper, and can be adorned with all kinds of intricate designs and symbols and so on. And in fact, the aesthetic value of such pots or bowls is often viewed as an offering in and of itself. And I should say that these bowls are cleaned, fastidiously cleaned, thoroughly cleaned, to ensure that they're free of any dirt or dust or that may have accumulated. And of course, this signifies the purity and respect with which we're making these offerings. And similarly, the water itself should be pure and clean and fresh. Always fresh water is used. So one by one, you pour water into each bowl, beginning with the one on the left usually and moving through to the seventh. And as you do this, you can silently or verbally recite the associated aspiration or prayer that you've assigned to each bowl. And as I mentioned, these aspirations or prayers can be quite simple. They can be short. For example, while pouring water into the first bowl, you might say, "May my generosity benefit all sentient beings." It can be as short and simple as that. Or it can be more elaborate. Sometimes people will do these water bowl offerings so often that they'll end up memorizing the prayers that they've associated with each bowl, and they can be entire paragraphs. When filling each bowl, you usually use a ladle or sometimes a specific pitcher to pour the water. And again, this is done with a sense of reverence and mindfulness, and it's important to do this with a sense of pure motivation, wishing that all beings are going to benefit from our acts of generosity. This is an offering of generosity. And when Tibetans make these offerings, they often visualize that the bowls are not just filled with ordinary water, but they're filled with sacred nectar, or what they call ambrosia, which transforms these offerings into vast oceans of the most desirable substances. Once again, Tibetans don't do this on a limited or a small basis. This is, we're imagining that we're making perfect gifts to all enlightened beings, and that our gifts are infinite, with the wish that our offerings will bring them joy, and that they will be pleased with our offerings, and that they will smile and return blessings back to us and to all sentient beings. And then, as I mentioned before, and probably other videos too, very often, because this is a central feature of Tibetan Buddhism, at the end of the offering, always, practitioners recite dedications and prayers expressing their intentions. For example, they dedicate the merit generated by their offering by praying or saying things like, "May the merits of my offerings lead to the enlightenment and happiness of all sentient beings." They may say, "May my offerings contribute to the benefit of all sentient beings, that they will know joy and the true causes of happiness." Or they may dedicate the merit to the enlightenment of all their mother sentient beings, because the Buddha taught that everyone you meet has been your mother or father or brother or sister at least once in a previous lifetime. So everyone that you see has been your mother at one time. And so when they say for the benefit of all mother sentient beings, they mean for the benefit of all. Then after the practice, the water is very carefully poured into, usually outside in a clean space like a garden area or someplace where you won't step on it. And Tibetans will often imagine that pouring the water out onto the ground signifies their non-attachment, and it's a form of dedicating the merit again to all sentient beings. They'll say that when they're pouring the water. And finally, I should mention that it's important to make your water offerings every single day. You don't want to limit your practice to specific occasions. After all, regular practice is the very best way for us to cultivate a pure and compassionate mind and to generate enough dedication and merit to make steady progress on a spiritual path. That's the purpose for these practices anyway. And so we want to take time each day to carefully clean the bowls and straighten up our shrine and keep things nice and neat and tidy. And after all, the ritual act of making water offerings is a means of inner transformation that's meant to cultivate qualities such as purity and compassion and wisdom that will lead us down the path. So these spiritual practices train our mind to be generous, and it helps us let go of our attachments. And while this water offering is a simple practice, it teaches us that even humble offerings can be made with a pure heart. And when they are done with the proper motives and intentions, they can be incredibly profound and powerful. Remember that each offering that we make generates merit, or what I've called positive karma, that supports our spiritual development and purifies our mind stream and helps us eliminate the obscurations to enlightenment. So when we perform water offerings as a part of a daily practice, for example, we're definitely removing obstacles and opening our hearts so that we'll be better able to receive divine blessings and insights and so on. This process of setting up these bowls and carefully filling them and dedicating the merit to others and so on requires sufficient attention to detail that when it's done mindfully and with present moment awareness, this practice is really an effective form of mindfulness meditation. It's also creating a sacred space. It's inspiring deeper devotion and increasing our commitment to the path. So it has many benefits. I hope you can see that Tibetan water bowl offerings are a beautiful and deeply meaningful way to strengthen your aspirations and help cultivate positive qualities in your life that will systematically train your mind in generosity and humility and patience and devotion, all of which are so critically important and argue so strongly for making offerings a central component of your daily practice. Finally, making these offerings is also a powerful way for us to connect with the divine and to connect with our spiritual path and to express our devotion and to purify our minds and focus our attention on the virtues and cultivate generosity and ethical conduct and diligence and wisdom. It's I strongly believe that water offerings are such a profound and meaningful practice for everyone that I sincerely hope you will consider making offerings a part of your own daily practice and integrate the virtues. Use water offerings to integrate the virtues into your daily life. Well, thanks for watching. I hope that you found this video informative. Please support the channel by subscribing and telling your friends about us. And we'll see you next time right here on Journey of Self-Awareness. Bye-bye.